Skygazi, I want to want to take us.
The towering mountains of Colorado, capped with snow and surrounded by dense forests, have always drawn hikers from all over the world. Among the countless trails that cut through this rugged wilderness, one young woman named Melissa set out alone. She was a passionate and fearless thru-hiker, someone who dreamed of discovering herself in the silence of nature. Determined and strong-willed, Melissa decided to take on the Colorado Trail, a long and challenging route that only the bravest attempt to conquer on their own. Her friends and family described her as independent and courageous. In her backpack, she carried only the essentials: a compact tent, dried food, a water bottle, maps, and a camera to capture the beauty around her. But more valuable than anything she carried physically was her inner strength, a sense of determination that pushed her forward through every grueling mile of her journey. During the day, the trails appeared beautiful and inviting. Sunlight filtered through the pines, and the views stretched endlessly across valleys and snow-tipped ridges. But when night fell, the wilderness transformed into something far more unsettling. An eerie silence would settle over the forest, broken only by the wind rustling through the trees or the distant cry of a wild animal. Melissa, however, was not easily frightened. She reminded herself that this was simply nature's way, raw, untamed, and honest. What she didn't realize, though, was that the silence of these mountains held more than just the presence of wildlife. Somewhere, hidden within the shadows, another presence lingered. Someone was out there, watching her steps, following her progress. But they never revealed themselves, not yet. For Melissa, this journey wasn't just a hike, it was a collision point between dreams and fear, between the beauty she sought and the danger that lurked unseen. With each passing day, she laughed, smiled, and recorded her surroundings on her camera, unaware that a darker story was quietly unfolding in the background. The shadows were drawing closer, and with them, the true nightmare of her adventure was about to begin. As the days went by, Melissa's hike grew both more demanding and more rewarding. The Colorado wilderness was unforgiving: steep climbs, loose gravel, sudden storms rolling in without warning, but she thrived on the challenge. Every step brought her closer to proving something not only to herself but to the world. She was strong, capable, and unafraid of the solitude that came with thru-hiking. But slowly, little things began to disturb the peace of her journey. At first, she brushed them off as coincidence. One morning, she noticed footprints near her camp that didn't match her own boot pattern. They were fresh, pressed deep into the soil, as if someone had walked close to her tent during the night. She shook her head and told herself it was probably another hiker passing through. After all, she wasn't the only one out here, was she? Later that day, as she paused to rest and take a drink of water, she had the strangest sensation of being watched. The forest was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Melissa scanned the trees but saw nothing, only the endless green of the pines swaying in the wind. She convinced herself it was just her imagination, a trick of exhaustion after long miles. Yet, something about that feeling stayed with her. She began recording short video diaries on her camera, not just to document her trip, but almost as if she was leaving breadcrumbs of her experience, a record of her thoughts. Her voice in those videos carried excitement, but there was also a nervous laugh that hadn't been there before. She said things like, "I think I heard something last night, maybe just animals, but it felt weird," followed by a shrug to the lens. At night, she started waking up to faint noises outside her tent. Twigs snapping, leaves crunching. It could have been deer, maybe a bear, but somehow it felt different. The movements weren't random, they were deliberate, slow, almost calculated. Someone, or something, was moving carefully, trying not to be heard. Melissa would hold her breath, clutching her flashlight, too afraid to unzip the tent and look outside. Eventually, the sounds would stop, and she would fall back into a restless sleep. What Melissa didn't know then was that her instincts were right. She wasn't alone. Somewhere in the darkness of those woods, a pair of eyes was locked on her, following her every step, waiting for the right moment to move closer. By the third week of her journey, Melissa's sense of unease had grown stronger. She couldn't ignore the signs anymore. Each morning when she packed up her camp, she noticed things that felt off: an item slightly out of place, her tent flap unzipped just an inch even though she was certain she had secured it, or the faint echo of footsteps that faded the moment she turned to look. During one hike across a rocky ridge, she paused to take in the view and spotted something in the distance. A figure, standing far back along the trail she had just traveled. They were too far away to make out details, but their stillness was unnerving. Whoever it was, they weren't hiking like her. They weren't moving with purpose. They were just standing there, watching. Melissa blinked, rubbed her eyes, and when she looked again, the figure was gone. She tried to convince herself it was another thru-hiker who had stopped to rest, but deep down, she knew better. The way her stomach nodded told her this was different. This was personal. That night, she recorded another video diary. Her face in the glow of her headlamp looked tense. "I think someone's following me," she whispered into the camera. "I don't know if it's real or if I'm just tired and imagining things, but it doesn't feel right. I don't feel safe." The forest seemed to respond to her fear. Every sound felt amplified. The snapping of a branch, the rustle of leaves, even the call of an owl made her heart race. She sat in her tent clutching a pocketknife she carried for protection, whispering to herself that it was all in her head. But when she tried to sleep, she kept hearing it. Footsteps circling, slow and deliberate, as though someone was testing how close they could get without being caught. Melissa began hiking longer distances during the day, hoping to outpace whoever, or whatever, was shadowing her. But no matter how many miles she covered, the feeling of being followed never went away. Each bend in the trail felt like a trap waiting to spring, each shadow in the woods seemed to move with her. The wilderness that once felt like a sanctuary was turning into a maze she couldn't escape. And with every passing night, the invisible figure grew bolder, closing in just enough to remind her she was never truly alone. Melissa's recordings grew darker with each passing day. What began as cheerful vlogs about the beauty of the mountains were now tinged with fear. Her voice cracked more often, her eyes darted to the sides of the frame as if she expected someone to appear behind her at any moment. She confessed to the camera, "It's not just in my head. I know it now. Someone is out here with me." Her unease escalated after a chilling discovery. While setting up camp near a small creek, she found a cigarette butt lying just a few feet from where she planned to pitch her tent. Melissa didn't smoke, and she hadn't seen another hiker for days. The realization hit her like a cold wave. Someone had been there recently, watching her, close enough to leave traces. That night, she tried to sleep, but her fear made rest impossible. Around midnight, she heard the unmistakable sound of a zipper sliding open. Her heart stopped. She glanced at her tent door, still closed. The sound hadn't come from her shelter. It came from somewhere nearby, as if another tent was being quietly opened. She lay frozen, barely breathing, clutching her knife. Minutes dragged by, and the sound of footsteps crunching leaves echoed faintly before fading into the night. In her next video log, Melissa's tone shifted. She wasn't just scared, she was angry. "If someone's out here messing with me, they better back off," she said firmly. But the quiver in her voice betrayed her. She was trying to stay brave, but the cracks in her confidence were showing. During the day, she pushed herself harder, moving faster, skipping rest stops, almost running along the trail. She stopped smiling into the camera. Instead, she began whispering, as if afraid the trees themselves might carry her words to the stalker. At one point, she turned her camera toward the forest, zooming in on the thick trees. "I swear I saw him," she whispered. But when she replayed the footage, there was nothing but endless shadows. Melissa didn't know it yet, but her instincts were guiding her to prepare. She began hiding things, small notes tucked into her gear, extra recordings stored on memory cards she concealed in unusual places. Somewhere deep inside, she understood she might not make it out. And she wanted to leave behind proof of what was happening. By the time Melissa reached the midsection of the Colorado Trail, her fear had hardened into survival instinct. She was no longer just hiking, she was being hunted, and she knew it. Every step she took was calculated. Every camp she chose was picked with caution, often in hidden spots far from the main path, as if she could somehow vanish from the eyes tracking her. Her camera footage from this stretch revealed a woman torn between exhaustion and sheer willpower. She looked straight into the lens, her face pale, her voice hoarse. "I know he's there," she whispered. "He doesn't come close enough for me to see his face, but I hear him. Every night, he waits until I'm alone. He wants me to know he's out there." The evidence of her stalker grew more undeniable. One evening, Melissa returned to her camp after gathering water to find her backpack had been unzipped. Nothing was stolen, nothing disturbed, except for one thing. Her knife had been moved from its sheath and placed neatly on top of her sleeping bag. A silent message, one that sent chills through her veins. He had been inside her tent. He had touched her belongings. And he had chosen to leave her a reminder that she wasn't safe anywhere. Melissa's journal entries, later found scattered in her gear, showed how deeply this rattled her. She wrote about hearing heavy breathing just outside her tent at night, about waking to the sound of rocks clinking together as though someone was deliberately making noise to let her know he was there. It wasn't random wildlife anymore. It was a person who wanted her to feel his presence. Desperate, Melissa began hiking into the night, using her headlamp to put more distance between herself and her invisible pursuer. The footage from these nights is haunting, her flashlight beam bouncing off trees, her breath quick and shaky as she whispers updates to the camera. If something happens to me, this is proof. Someone is following me. Despite the terror, there was a grim determination in her actions. She wasn't going to give up. She wasn't going to let this man erase her story. In the midst of her growing paranoia, Melissa made a choice that would later prove vital. She began hiding her recordings, stashing memory cards in places where no one would think to look. It was as though she knew these videos might one day be the only voice she had left. Melissa's world had become a cycle of exhaustion, fear, and survival. Every sunrise brought a fragile sense of relief, because daylight felt safer. But as soon as the sun dipped behind the jagged ridges, dread set in. Nightfall was when the forest turned into something predatory, when the unseen man who haunted her steps seemed to draw closest. In her camera footage from this period, Melissa's voice was quieter, more fragile. She sat by the dim light of her headlamp, her eyes wide and hollow. "I don't sleep anymore," she confessed. "Every sound keeps me awake. Every time I close my eyes, I imagine him standing outside the tent. Waiting." And she wasn't wrong. The evidence of her stalker's presence grew bolder. One night, she woke to the faint glow of light flickering between the trees. At first, she thought it might be another hiker with a headlamp, but then she realized the beam wasn't moving along the trail. It wasn't traveling with purpose. It was hovering, trained on her campsite. Someone was standing there, shining the light directly at her tent, silently watching. She froze, her breath shallow, clutching the knife in her hand. The light didn't move for nearly a minute. Then, slowly, it disappeared, swallowed by the forest as though it had never been there. Melissa didn't sleep for the rest of the night. In the following days, paranoia consumed her. She began setting small traps around her camp, sticks carefully arranged to snap if stepped on, rocks balanced on logs to fall if disturbed. The next morning, one of her makeshift alarms had been triggered. Someone had walked the perimeter of her camp while she slept. Her footage became more frantic. She whispered into the camera, her voice breaking. "I don't think he's going to stop. He knows I'm scared. He wants me to stay scared. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." But even as her fear deepened, Melissa showed remarkable resilience. She kept hiking, kept documenting, kept leaving behind traces of her truth. She was determined, almost defiantly so, to make sure if something happened to her, the world would know what she endured. Still, the invisible figure was always there, one step behind, one breath away, an inescapable shadow closing in with every passing mile. By this stage of her journey, Melissa was no longer the same hiker who had stepped confidently onto the Colorado Trail weeks earlier. The woman who once laughed at the camera, who marveled at the beauty of mountain ridges and alpine meadows, now looked gaunt, her smile forced, her eyes shadowed with fatigue and fear. She wasn't just hiking anymore. She was surviving a nightmare that seemed to have no end. Her videos from these days grew increasingly desperate. She often whispered, scanning the trees behind her, pausing mid-sentence as though she had heard something just out of range. "He's closer," she said once, her voice trembling. "I can feel it. He's not even trying to hide anymore." One night, Melissa captured one of the most chilling pieces of evidence on her camera. She had set it on a log, recording herself as she talked in hushed tones about her plans to leave the trail early, to find a way back to town. But in the background, faint, almost hidden, a shape appeared between the trees. A figure, tall and motionless, standing in the shadows. Melissa never turned to see it. She kept talking, unaware that she was being filmed with her stalker only yards away. The next morning, she found more signs. Her food bag, which she had hung high from a branch to keep animals away, was slashed open. The contents had been dumped onto the ground. Nothing was stolen, but the deliberate vandalism was unmistakable. He wasn't just following her now. He was toying with her, sending her messages. The psychological strain weighed heavily on her. She admitted in her recordings that she felt trapped, that every trail seemed to loop back into itself, as though she were walking in circles while her pursuer stayed just outside the frame. It's like he knows where I'll be before I even get there, she whispered, tears in her eyes. But even through her terror, Melissa's willpower shone. She didn't stop recording. She didn't stop fighting to leave a trail of evidence. Her words carried a haunting clarity. If someone finds this, please believe me. Please know I didn't imagine this. He's real. And he's here. By now, the line between wilderness and nightmare had blurred completely. The Colorado mountains no longer looked like a backdrop to adventure, they had become a prison. And somewhere in that vast silence, the hunter grew bolder, preparing for whatever he intended to do next. Melissa's disappearance began quietly, almost without notice. For days, there was no word from her. No new posts, no updates, no calls to family. At first, her friends thought it was nothing unusual. Reception along the Colorado Trail was spotty, and Melissa had mentioned she might go off-grid for stretches of time. But when days stretched into a week, concern grew into panic. Her family reported her missing, and soon search and rescue teams fanned out across the rugged mountains. Helicopters swept the skies, dogs combed through valleys, and volunteers scoured the trails. For a while, it seemed like the entire wilderness had come alive with people calling her name. But the mountains gave nothing back. Not a single sign of Melissa was found, no backpack, no gear, no body. It was as if she had simply vanished into the trees. Hikers who had been on the trail around the same time were questioned. Some remembered seeing Melissa. One couple recalled passing her on a ridge, cheerful but tired. Another claimed they had seen her setting up camp near a creek. But none of them had noticed anything unusual, no one suspicious trailing her, no signs of struggle. It was as though the shadow that haunted her had never existed outside of her recordings. Weeks passed, then months. The official search was scaled back, though Melissa's family refused to give up hope. They returned to the mountains year after year, leaving flyers, talking to hikers, begging for any information. Rumors began to swirl. Some said she had fallen, her body hidden in a ravine too deep to search. Others whispered darker theories, that she had been taken, that the wilderness was not what it seemed. Her case became one of Colorado's enduring mysteries. Online forums buzzed with speculation, hikers swapped stories about strange encounters on the trail, and her name became almost a ghost story told around campfires. Melissa, the solo hiker who vanished without a trace. As investigators began to study the SD card hidden in her shoe, the atmosphere in the small police department grew heavier. Each officer knew that what they were about to uncover could finally explain her fate, or open a door to even darker questions. The card was old, its plastic casing worn and slightly cracked from years of being hidden against her foot during long miles on the trail. Yet, miraculously, it still functioned. The first files were ordinary. Photos of mountains, rivers, and campsites, snapshots of her journey, filled with the joy of adventure. But as the officers clicked through the images, the tone shifted. Grainy nighttime shots appeared, blurry and rushed, as if taken in fear. A campfire scene from a distance. A silhouette of a man whose face could not be made out. A tent torn open under moonlight. The officers exchanged nervous glances, realizing these were not just memories but fragments of her final days. Then came short video clips. In one, her voice trembled as she whispered into the camera, saying someone was following her. She described footsteps echoing behind her, even in the most remote sections of the trail. Another clip showed her hiding, her breathing rapid, the camera angled low as if she was crouched behind rocks. The fear in her eyes was undeniable. The last file stopped everyone cold. It was filmed in near darkness, the camera shaking violently as she ran. Branches snapped, her breath came in frantic bursts, and then, silence. The screen went black. That was the final entry, as if her story had ended mid-scream. The discovery left the room in silence. Some officers sat back in disbelief, others leaned forward, haunted by what they had just seen. The SD card had given her a voice years after she vanished, and though it brought answers, it also deepened the mystery. Who was the man in the shadows? Was he real, or a figure her fear created? And why had the evidence been hidden so carefully in her shoe? The final scene of the story unfolded not on the trail, but in the minds of those who now carried her memory. The SD card had offered fragments of her last moments, but the questions it raised still lingered like fog over the mountains she once hiked. Her family, when shown the evidence, broke down in tears. For years they had lived in limbo, unsure whether she was alive, lost, or gone forever. Now, though the footage confirmed her struggle and fear, it also offered a strange form of closure. News of the discovery spread quickly. Hikers across Colorado shared her story, warning others to be cautious, to never underestimate the wilderness or the dangers that may lie unseen. Online forums filled with theories. Some believed the man in the shadows was a real stalker who had tracked her through remote terrain, others argued it could have been paranoia caused by exhaustion and isolation. But the SD card, with its final dark footage, refused to give a clear answer. Detectives re-examined the case with fresh eyes. They revisited old witness statements, scoured missing persons reports, and compared the silhouette in the photos to known individuals. Yet nothing matched. The trail, once again, grew cold. The only undeniable truth was that she had been terrified, and that fear had driven her final steps. Her story became more than just a mystery, it turned into a haunting legend among hikers. Some claimed to have seen strange figures while trekking the same trails. Others carried charms or kept diaries, inspired by the way she had documented everything, even in her final hours. The wilderness had taken many before, but her voice, captured on that fragile SD card, continued to echo long after her disappearance. In the end, she became both a warning and a memory. A solo thru-hiker who set out in search of freedom and beauty, only to vanish into the silence of the mountains, leaving behind whispers of a story that will never be fully told.